As we embark on this project, let's understand what's at stake here. The purchasing habits and decisions of corporations are hugely impactful, not only on the performance of those individual companies, but in fact, on the world we inhabit. The way businesses vote with their money through their buying does not only shape the expense side of a ledger, it shapes the world. Given these stakes, the business community, and whether they know it or not, the rest of the world has a massive interest in ensuring that the activities of procurement departments and the individuals within them are as likely as possible to produce desirable outcomes. And yet, and here's the thesis we're going to be exploring with this project, a handful of flaws in widely accepted procurement incentive structures have caused unintended but substantial harms in this context. And, critically, the implications of these harms are worsening with time, hindering impact on P&L performance, sustainability, social impact, and risk mitigation. For procurement to become a more purposeful function, it seems that these flaws in the system must be remedied. By the way, we'll be exploring this matter in the upcoming 24-episode season. Along the way, we'll be talking to experts to help us understand the nature of these flaws in the system, their origin stories, and their impacts in the present day, to the P&L, to other forms of value creation that a more purposeful procurement would and should be driving. And in the latter stages of the season, we'll be talking with various experts who will help us to envision and build a new, forward-looking set of procurement incentives which might help point the way to more purposeful procurement. We'll publish the results at season's end for listeners to take and use as they see fit. Thanks for joining us for this project. We want your feedback along the way. While those of us behind the project do share certain perspectives on the subject matter, this is not a mission to prove a specific thesis, but rather it's a mission to conduct some journalism on the topic, seeking truth and the best way forward. We're pretty sure there are indeed flaws in the system today, but as to the extent of the harms, or let alone the appropriate remedies, we're going to search for the answers throughout this project. So, welcome to By the Way to Purposeful Procurement. Let's get started.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the first episode of By the Way. I'm joined today by my co-host for the series, Fine-Tune CEO Rich Ham, and my partner at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barnett. Rich and Kelly, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Phil. I'm excited to be here, excited for the project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me join. Well,
we're going to be publishing this series in the Art of Procurement feed. It's going to be, you get, if you're listening today, the day that it was published, this first episode was published, you'll see actually 3 different episodes. So for today, we've published 3 episodes of this series, but it's a year-long project that we're going to be having episodes every 2 weeks that drop in the AOP feed. So look out for those. It'll be easy to see which ones are the By the Way podcasts versus which ones are the Art of Procurement podcast. But we're looking forward to kind of going on this journey for the next, what will be 24 episodes in total. And Rich, you talked a little bit in the opener, the monologue that we had before we started the conversation or started the episode today. Can you talk a little bit about your background and how that's kind of contributed to the thesis that you talked about in that opener?
Sure. Well, I'm the CEO of a consulting business called Fine-Tune. We're an expense management consultancy focused on indirect services specifically, which I think is, as you consider the spectrum of expenses, are at the highly complex end of the spectrum, the deep end of the pool, as opposed to simpler widgets. Indirect services is where the greatest complexity exists, and this is where we've been. These are the waters we've been swimming in for 23 years now. I started Fine-Tune back in early 2002, and I don't have a background in procurement, and actually, only one of my team members does. Most of us brought operators or business owners' perspectives to the business. And I also think, I like to think of myself as a common sense Midwesterner, and not that common sense is the exclusive province of the Midwest, nor that there's none elsewhere. But I kind of think that is, in part me. And so I thought I brought a common sense approach to business to Fine-Tune. And so in that vein, I always assumed as we were starting the business that there was one thing that everybody would always want as it relates to the management of any expense: to find optimal and stay there. I always assumed that that would just be the goal. And of course, there's other procurement practitioners, as we know, do more than just play a role in influencing the expense side of the ledger. And we're going to talk about some of those things. There's, a huge range of forms of value creation that come out of procurement. But I assumed that as it related to expense management, that's what my clients would want. They'd want to find optimal and stay there. And yet, over time, I was surprised, occasionally even shocked, at how often that really wasn't the goal. The goal very often revolved around certain sets of incentive structures that were, I think, well-intended and designed to promote efficient and effective behavior by procurement practitioners and departments as a whole, but far too often actually weren't really. There were unintended consequences, and these flaws in the system caused the behaviors of the people playing by these rules to not be optimally tied to whether it's P&L performance or other forms of value creation that procurement with purpose, a more purposeful procurement would and should produce, as we alluded to in the opening monologue. And so, I found myself thinking that an exploration of, these, what I would argue are flaws in the system and how they manifest both in the business in terms of hindrances to optimal P&L based ownership-minded behavior, and also hindrances to other forms of value creation would be a worthwhile research project, if you will. And then I thought, well, this conversation, it really belongs on the Art of Procurement feed. Your listeners, your community of followers are the very people who I think would be most, interested in the subject matter here. And also they are the very people who might find that as an outcome or an output of this project that we had played some role in pointing them to a better future somehow. And so I think, as I think of the grandest ambitions of the project, that's kind of what it looks like, the way to more purposeful procurement. And so, that is how I came to it, not from procurement, but serving procurement for a long time, worked with thousands of procurement practitioners, enough so that I've formed some thoughts that I'll surely not be shy about sharing along the way as we go.
No, and when you pitched the idea of this, we talked about it probably 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And as soon as you started talking about it, I thought, this is something that I think is really valuable and interesting. And, it's in procurement, we have always struggled with how do we go beyond savings? We've talked, at least, I've been in procurement now 25 years, and we talk about it. We talked about it 25 years ago. We talk about it now. I still feel that it's something that we haven't really solved for as a profession in procurement. Is how can the way that we are measured, therefore the way that we're incented, drive, optimize the value that we can bring to a business. And often the ways that we are incented doesn't necessarily drive, it drives short-term thinking rather than kind of long-term impact. And so as we set off on the journey, I think something that you said in the monologue at the beginning, which was definitely on point, is we don't necessarily have all the answers at the moment. And that's part of the purpose for doing the podcast series, is to kind of go on this journey of exploration to find, why have we never been able to necessarily move past that notion of it's savings, and it's measured in a very specific way. Other things that are inhibiting us from being measured beyond that, are those external, are those internal to procurement? And to get ideas from outside and other procurement organizations, frankly, who have managed to do that. And what can we all learn and take from it, so that by the end, we hopefully have some real actionable insights, something that's really concrete in terms of these are the things that you can do both from a procurement organization, from a leadership level for your team, but also at an individual level as well, just within the scope of your responsibilities.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on that a little bit, but before I do, I want to go to Kelly. Kelly, it's funny, when I met Phil in Chicago a few months back and kind of socialized this idea of this project to him, and it was funny, that was the first time I felt like I had known Phil enough that he had become a friend, and yet it was the first time I ever met him face to face. I think we've all forged some relationships like this here and there, and a lot of it traces to the pandemic. You know, as we all just kind of like were huddled in our homes, getting to know new people on Zoom. Phil was one of the people that I really got to know through those years. So it was cool. I got to meet Phil in my hometown in Chicago, and we were talking about the project. But before he could commit to the project, he wanted to call you and get your 2 cents. And so he, presumably there was a conversation. I wasn't a part of that conversation, but he called you and told you about the project, and you reacted how? I'm curious to hear your reaction.
I mean, I come to this instinctively as sort of half a former procurement professional and half somebody who's now been in sort of the content space, assisting space, observing space for a while. It's not a new complaint, if I can use that word, right? To be concerned about, well, we're only viewed in terms of the savings that we can deliver, or we're only measured, and so this is the only thing we have the incentive to deliver. But being able to solve the problem has always seemed one step too far. And I think from my own position, part of why that is the case is because it's not something procurement can fix alone. It's not something that our business stakeholders can fix alone. It's not something that corporate leadership can fix alone. It's something that everybody has a piece, and the ultimate incentive has to be shared. And so I thought if we could have the bigger conversation and bring in all of these different points of view, we might actually finally, after how many decades, set ourselves up to either see the problem differently enough that we change our thinking about it, or actually set ourselves up for success to be able to solve it, which would be the best thing of all.
Yeah, that's so well put, Kelly. And following up on your comments there, I can't, because you alluded to it, this being a common complaint. One of my VPs, who was actually a guest on your show not too long ago, brilliant guy named Alex Carlson, who's kind of a facilities management guru but has a procurement background. He said to me at one point when he was reflecting on his time spent in procurement, he said, I can't tell you how often I had to choose between doing what was best for me and doing what was best for the company. And he said, and I thought to myself, this shouldn't be happening. I should not be forced to choose between doing what's best for me and doing what's best for the company. And of course, what this is pointing to is a problem with incentives. And of course, I wasn't surprised to hear Alex say this, because over the last 20 years, the comments take different forms. Sometimes it's, I know it doesn't make any sense, but that's just the way we do things here. Or I know it's all money and it should all be counted as money, but only this part actually counts, and then this other part it doesn't count. It's worthless. And so there's a million variations of these kinds of comments that I've heard through the years, and they all point to this. There's some flaws in the system. There's some flies in the ointment here that perhaps we should talk about. And yes, I think, as you alluded to, the solutions aren't easy. It's probably part of why the flaws exist in the first place. is it was like, okay, well, this is the easy path, because doing it any other way seems too daunting, too difficult, too hard. And that will be, I think, part of our conversation thread as we go here. But I think part of what we talk about too is perhaps the case for trying to solve the problems is a better case than it's ever been, because the harms to the status quo have worsened with time. And so it is time to kind of like talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room and talk about solutions. Phil?
Yeah, I think that it's also one of those existential things for procurement. We're talking a lot at the moment, in a variety of different formats about what does procurement look like, when you have this influx of new technologies that are coming along that, will have the ability to replicate a lot of the tasks that a buyer does. Mm-hmm. And so the perception of procurement, as this technology comes in, will determine what the role of procurement is on the other side. Is the role for procurement to play a more, strategic kind of role in an organization, helping the organization think about how they spend money and where they spend money and what goes into that? Or will procurement be seen as, well, you were just really always running a process, and now we've got some technology that can run that process. So we don't really have much of a need for procurement once we have, a lot of AI agents going and running these sourcing processes, because all you really did was run that process. So for me, tackling the questions that we're going to be tackling during this program, during the run of shows that we're doing, helps us redefine kind of what the role of procurement should be on the other side, and what are the incentives that, how we are measured will be a driver of how strategic or not we are.
Couldn't agree more, Phil. I think for the benefit of the listeners, we should maybe lay out, kind of chart the roadmap of where we think we're going with this project. Let's put an asterisk next to this. John Lennon, life's what happens while you're busy making other plans. But we've got some plans. We do have some plans. We have an idea of how we think this project is going to go. And it's something like this, okay? Phil and Kelly and I are going to set the table in these first couple episodes, talking a little about the flaws in the system and how we and many procurement practitioners, I think, believe that they implicate behaviors among procurement professionals and what the significance of those behaviors and imperfections in the system might be. But we don't want to stay in the muck and the mire forever. And so quickly after that, in our third and fourth episodes, we're going to talk to a couple of fantastic guests who are going to, I think, be just phenomenal representatives of what procurement with purpose, what purposeful procurement can look like. And even they would say, I've got an even more idealized vision of what it can be than my work today. There's still room to grow it, but they're inspiring examples of purposeful procurement. From there, we want to also see if we can chase down the origin story a bit. Like, why are we here? How did we get here? Why are the rules what they are today? And see if there's something we can learn from our history, in terms of how the lay of the land has evolved to where we are today within procurement. And then from there, there'll be a stream of guests coming on. We're going to talk about impacts to the business. We're going to talk about impacts to other forms of value creation that procurement you would hope would be driving, and how the flaws within the incentive structures may stand as hindrances to those forms of value creation. But then in the latter stages of the season, we want to actually, conceptualize and build a plan, a new set of incentive structures and scorekeeping metrics that we think will be more forward-looking and will kind of unshackle the procurement professional to be more purposeful, not only in terms of business performance, but in other ways too that extend beyond the company's walls. And I hope that while we start off at times kind of acknowledging flaws in the system and acknowledging the ways in which the profession as a whole is being held back from its potential, I hope we will finish building up to a higher note as we envision what could be, and I'm excited about that path. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but I'm really looking forward to that, kind of that arc.
Yeah, as we've said, we want to take the journey of, yes, we'll reflect on why we're here and some of the flaws in the system, and we'll do that in our next episode. But really, this is about this journey of discovery of, okay, how can we take... I've always been a really big believer in taking things that others are already doing in other areas and applying them to, for example, procurement. So it's going to be interesting to learn from what others are doing, to say, okay, what can we learn from what other people are doing, and how can we apply that to procurement so that procurement professionals go to their job every day feeling like they have more purpose, but also so that procurement as an organization, as an entity, is really having as much impact as it can have on the business in a positive way. And
before Kelly, I would love to hear from Kelly, but before we pass it to you, Kelly, for your thoughts on the path ahead, I want to make sure we remember to ask your community of listeners for their input, because you may have listeners that are thinking, oh, I know somebody who knows a lot about the crafting of procurement department plans. I know somebody who played a role in big consulting decades ago, that really was a key part of the origin story for how we got here today. I know somebody who's a global leader in sustainable procurement or in social impact through procurement. We want to hear from these people. And so I want to ask your listeners, as there's a reason we're telling you what the story arc that lies ahead is, and it's in part so that you can help us make it even better by helping introduce us to people we should be meeting that might have interesting insights on the topic.
And who may have actually tried to solve this problem. We may have somebody come forward and say, nope, I tried that and it did not work for the following reasons. That's something that we can all learn from. I think what I will offer at this starting point in the journey is that just because a situation or a set of circumstances isn't ideal does not mean that it hasn't become comfortable with time. And so some of the things that we're going to bring up, that we're going to challenge, that we're going to hopefully dislodge and replace with better ideas, as much as the things that we're moving on to are hopefully better alternatives, it doesn't mean that there aren't a few things that are going to be really hard for us to let go of. So I would just ask everybody, be open-minded. If you find yourself trying to hold on to something and say, no, we absolutely can't change that thing because, really sit with that a minute, right? Be open to the idea of changing it, because in some cases, we get so used to something being frustrating, uncomfortable, just simply the status quo, that even letting go of that suboptimal thing seems really hard. So that's the challenge to everybody. Let us know if you've tried any of these techniques. Let us know if you think you have a solution. But if you find yourself not wanting to let go of the way you've done it in the past, just give us a chance to try to change your mind.
I'm so glad you said that, Kelly, because I was saying to Phil just earlier today, I said we should, in the first episode, remind the listener that this project is not a referendum on procurement. It really is an exploration of are there some flaws in the system that are holding procurement back from its full potential? And if we stripped away those flaws, how much more purposeful could the function become? We come to this project knowing that there are many, many, many good outputs from the procurement world, despite these flaws that we're exploring here. And so it's not a referendum on the profession as a whole, but it is, as you say, going to be uncomfortable at times. And it will cause, I think, listeners to go, yeah, that thing they're talking about, I remember a time where I went and did something that I actually thought was stupid while I was doing it, but I was doing it because I was advancing my interests within the rules of the game that had been handed to me. And so that, I think is going to be a part of it, but certainly not a referendum on the whole, on the profession.
All right. Well, we're going to be exploring some of those flaws on episode 2. But for episode 1, let's call that a wrap.
Indeed.
And we will be back again shortly with episode 2 of By the Way.